So it's April and time for another edition of Insight Your Month. I'm Harish. Insight Your Month is our monthly collection of recommendations for decision makers, leaders, and uplevelers, in which we cover books, podcasts, and basically anything that catches our fancy. So welcome, Ramanand.
Thanks, Harish.
And what's the article that you want to recommend for this edition?
So, our pick for the month is an article by Microsoft. It's called The Next Great Disruption is Hybrid Work. Are we ready? And it's a topic that we have been discussing in Smartcasts. We have an affinity for distributed remote work, but it looks like a lot of people will now start thinking about mixing remote work and getting together synchronously. So, this article does a very good job of both data and qualitative analysis of how that world could look like. And there were 7 different insights. One that particularly caught my eye is something that we have also realized, which is when these teams go remote, teams that are working together, their ties are strengthened. They work a lot with each other, but for tactical things, not necessarily for learning and getting to know each other. But that bond is still fairly reasonably secure. But it is your diverse network, it is your network outside of your immediate workmates that is coming under stress and strain because there is a lot of serendipity that is lost. So, this article does a very good job of bringing all these different elements. Some of them are obvious, some of them are a little interesting to learn. So, that's why our listeners and viewers should pick up this article and read it.
Right. So going back to our chemistry lessons, is the Van der Waals forces. That's a bond which is more susceptible to breaking.
Absolutely. In fact, you could call them as weak ties, and that's what our Smartcast of the month, the guest who was in the Smartcast, Naveen Kabra, he emphasized the power of weak ties when it comes to personal networking. And so Naveen is someone that a lot of people look up to because he does a good job of networking on social media. But in many ways, he's a classic engineer. He's not necessarily in the marketplace for talking about people, but he likes to talk about ideas, and he likes to write code and build things. So, how did he get into networking was a very fascinating conversation that started with his graduate days. It involves HTML, it involves film songs. So there's a nice little story that we uncovered. And of course, in that conversation, we spoke about his approach to learning new things, his approach to staying relevant, especially for mid-career professionals. He talks about a very nice framework in terms of the role, the sources of power inside an organization for an individual, and how a lot of it eventually comes down to relationships. So it kind of ties in very nicely with the article that we just referenced. So, Naveen being the archetypal computer engineer, we didn't talk so much about algorithms, but so I'm going to come to you for that.
Yeah, I was just realizing that though we never planned it, it seems like a very natural segue from one section to the other, because the pick for the book is a recommendation by our colleague Omkar. The book's title is Algorithms to Live By: The Computer Science of Human Decisions by Brian Christian and Tom Griffiths. It talks about how insights from algorithms in computer science can be applied to daily life to deal with very human questions. The same algorithm can be used to solve multiple seemingly different problems. For example, the optimal stopping algorithm can help you pick a life partner as well as decide on which parking spot to pick. We're probably using a version of it while picking the recommendations for the Insight Your Month as well, right?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So the next pick that we have is the book summary. We read one book summary every day, and this month's pick for the summary is a very interesting one. It's called Calling Bullshit by Carl Bergstrom and Jevin West. It's about the art of skepticism in a data-driven world. A related read is Tim Harford's latest book, How to Make the World Add Up. So I thought both were very similar and associated reads. Couple of takeaways from this summary for us were that for any piece of information, ask who is behind the information, how did they get it, and what are they trying to sell. I think this is extremely important in today's world. Identifying bullshit is not enough. You have to call it out. This is the one part which I sometimes struggle with, especially on some of these groups where I can see bullshit, but I probably refrain from picking it up with the person who's sent that. So that's something that I need to work on. So Raman, which podcast will you recommend for our listeners today?
So this podcast comes from the A16Z podcast. It's an episode that features Ben Horowitz, who published a book called "What You Do Is Who You Are." While this episode was recorded in 2019, which seems like eons away, but it was published recently, and the book is essentially about his take on company culture, and he has this knack of bringing in interesting anecdotes from history. In fact, a big part of that book is about the Haitian Revolution, one of the very few cases in history where slaves kind of overthrew and successfully managed to install a system of their own. So one takeaway that I took away from this podcast was that the difference between values and virtues. So he says that values are what you believe, but virtues are what you do, and they are not often the same. So when in doubt, look for what people do. The actions are more important than just beliefs. And he also gave a couple of very interesting examples of how values percolate from the top. They're often set from the top. So if you want to change values dramatically, you change the person at the top. And he gives the example of Apple and Amazon. So at Amazon, the value system is about frugality and passing on savings to the customer, which means that if you had 10 Amazonians working together in a cramped office space with ordinary desks, it would fit
Door,
very
door as a tabletop.
door as a yes, absolutely. It would fit very nicely with their value system. However, at Apple, even a single doorknob would have been chosen to be the best of its kind, and probably would be the most expensive thing in an Amazon room. So, and that fits perfectly well. So, very fascinating episode, and I think anyone interested in culture building and the role of values and likes history lessons should definitely listen to this episode. So, in some sense, what he was saying was that values and virtues, they hold up a mirror to your company. So that is a good segue for us to get into smart mirrors, which is our trend for today. And, when I heard about smart mirrors, I was a little flabbergasted. I wasn't sure if this was, if this is really a trend or not.
Yeah. In fact, when I read about it, I thought, you picked it for a nice April Fool's joke. Today we are recording it on 1st of April. But I was, really impressed by it. And when you read about it and when you think of it, it is something where you can actually probably use the dead time when you're standing in front of a mirror. I wish they would have given it something like, some reference to Snow White's stepmother, because that's what you can get the smart mirror to do for yourself, right?
Right. For our listeners, a smart mirror is as you would expect, it's a two-way mirror which has information such as you can have your Twitter timeline on it, you can have the weather on it, you can have it read out jokes for you. You can even use it to control the lighting inside your bathroom. So I think there's this general trend of smartification of objects around us. And so if you have any dead time, you will find some object that steps in to try and convert that dead time into more interesting time. So maybe someday you'll be reading a choice from a CTK Compounds offering. You'll be reading your daily pick from a mirror while you're brushing your teeth. So it will be the perfect piggybacking situation.
Yeah, perfect piggybacking, rightly said. So finally, to close out, here's a question for our viewers to think about. Which figure from the ancient past was very much future relevant in your view? And we are not referring to Snow White's stepmother here. And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Insight Your Month. We'll be back with the next edition in May.